Hello and welcome to the 14th episode of From the Margin Lands. I'm Aarti Kumar Rao.
Hi, I'm Prem Panika, and it's the 14th episode. And this week, we're looking at an issue. Normally, we have been discussing much broader themes, but here it's a specific issue, and that issue is this. At the southern end of India, where the Bay of Bengal meets the Andaman Sea, lies the Great Nicobar, which is one of the country's most remote and fragile ecosystems. Here, a project of staggering ambition is underway. There is a massive transshipment port that has been planned, a new airport or airports, it's not clear which, power plants, defense establishments, and a full fledged township. On paper, the plan promises jobs, it promises investment, it promises strategic clout.
But whenever India debates development, the conversation collapses into a binary. If you are for a project, you're pro growth. If you ask questions or even wonder about the veracity of it or the viability of it, you're anti national. We believe that the truth is too complicated to be reduced to such binaries. We, as in Prem and I, and from the margin lands. And the most patriotic thing that we can do is really ask the hard questions that stands to be in the good for the country. Who pays? Who benefits? How do we quantify these benefits? And what do we risk what do we risk losing at the altar of development?
These are all valid questions. They are questions that deserve to be asked. And part of the problem is that whenever we have these kind of debates, it takes on a political coloring, and that is counterproductive. So, in this episode, we are sitting down with Pankaj Sekhsaria, who's an environmental researcher who has spent decades studying and writing about the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and with investigative journalist M. Rajshekhar to unpack the Great Nicobar Project, its economics, its ecological cost, and its human stories. Our intent, and again, as in Arti's and mine, our intent in this episode is not to take sides in what is developing into a pie fight, but to understand what is truly at stake. Because asking questions isn't, as Arti pointed out, an anti national act. Rather, such debate and discussion is necessary if development is to be truly meaningful. So, without further ado,
Let us welcome Pankaj and Rajshekhar. Welcome, guys.
hey Pankaj, hey Shekhar, thanks for taking the time, guys. Pankaj, getting straight into this, uh, for the benefit of the people who are listening and watching, could you first give us a broad overview of what this whole Nicobar project, Great Nicobar project, is all about?
Yeah, so as we begin, but first also let me just locate Great Nicobar in the larger context. So Great Nicobar is the southernmost island in the Andaman and Nicobar group, which as we all know is located far away from mainland India in the Bay of Bengal. It's a pretty large island by the standards of the Andaman and Nicobar. It's about 920 odd square kilometers, which is maybe the third or the fourth largest single island within this larger group. The total area of, and it's almost about 10% of the total landmass of the entire Andaman and Nicobar Islands. It's in the extreme south, just above the Malacca Strait, and this point will certainly come up, and Rajshekhar has also written about that. And the island is quite unique in its own way within the larger unique Andaman and Nicobar Islands. It's 920 square kilometers of largely pristine forest. There's a very small portion of that island that is kind of being disturbed, if I might use the word. It has a very small human population, between 5,000 and 8,000 numbers, depending on what statistics you're looking at, of which about 1,000 odd plus people are from two indigenous communities. The others are settler communities that have come to the islands in the last 3-4 decades. So we are talking here of a extremely biologically, biodiversity wise, very rich island, which is home to two indigenous communities. One actually is a PVTG, a particularly vulnerable tribal group, which is the Shompen, and the other is the Nicobaris. And both these communities have probably been here for thousands of years. And I'm just stressing that because this is an island not just of very rich biological diversity, but also home to indigenous communities who've been here for a very long time and who obviously have the first right on the land and the resources. Now, in this island, for a very long time, because of its location and other reasons, there have been discussions of creating a kind of infrastructural system or set of projects over here. Uh, but to cut a long story short, in 2021, uh, pushed by the Niti Aayog and proposed first by a Gurgaon-based consulting company called AECOM India Private Limited. There was this massive project proposal that came out in the public domain in March of 2021, which is what we're talking about, and which has gone ahead with great amount of aggression and coordination and efficiency in the last 4 years. This is what's called broadly the Great Nicobar Infrastructure Project. I mean, that's a broad term. Now, this is a large project of what started off with a budget of about 71,000 crores. And within 3 years now, the latest figures that we heard in the Independence Day address of the Lieutenant Governor is about 91,000 crores. Within 4 years, you can see an appreciation of the cost of already 20%. So that's an important thing to mark because I'm not sure whether the project proponents really know what the cost of the project are going to be. But the project is divided into four large components, at the heart of which is a transshipment terminal, a port project, which is located in the extreme south in a place called Galathia Bay. And we'll come to that discussion. It's a very important site for multiple reasons. This is roughly about 40,000 crores worth of investment proposed at the moment, which is roughly half the proposed investment. Then there is a airport that is also proposed at the same, roughly at the adjoining area. There is a power plant that is proposed for obviously for powering the entire infrastructure there. And then there is a massive 130 square kilometer. I'm just emphasizing that 130 square kilometer new township, a tourism project. And this is pretty much virgin forest that we're talking about. There are some parts which are already settled and have all kinds of other human activities, but 130 square kilometers of some of the most pristine tropical evergreen forest in this country, which have not even been surveyed fully. So we are also talking of a lot of unknowns in that kind of context. And just to flag a couple of points, and we'll come to this, government estimates, including statements in parliament, suggest that for this project, about 130 square kilometers, largely the township, then estimated cutting of about 1 million trees. That is the official figure. They're talking of 9.63 lakhs as mentioned in parliament. Uh, Shekhar and myself have written about it, others have written about it. Scientists who have done a quick back of the envelope calculation say that this could be at least 3 times the number. It could be 3 million. Others say it could be 10 million trees in among the most pristine forests. So we are talking of a massive deforestation proposed. So, but to put it together is that this is this massive project of now 90,000 crores across four components that has been proposed in this very pristine island of very rich biodiversity, home to indigenous communities, and we'll discuss this later, in an area that is tectonically one of the most sensitive and vulnerable and active zones on this planet. So that's what the whole project is framed. And what has happened, and I'll just finish with this, is that we have seen a very coordinated, concerted, very efficient process by which all the ground, figuratively and metaphorically and literally, has been laid out in terms of the clearance processes. So environment clearance has been granted, stage 1 forest clearance has been granted, and as a matter of fact, even clearance under the Forest Rights Act has been granted. Right. And I think there's enough evidence to show, and we've been talking about it. There are documents in the public domain which suggest that there are problems in all of this. The boxes have been ticked on paper, but even there's a problem. And in the process that has been followed to get these clearances, there are many gaps that need to be that exist, that have been identified, but need to be questioned.
There's a lot to unpack in that, and we'll do that as we go along. But Shekhar, to the question of what this project is, which the government is calling some sort of holistic development project, I think they're saying, is there a coherent strategy? And this is to both Pankaj and Shekhar. Is there a coherent strategy you've heard that links the port, the airport, defense installation, township, casinos, all of this together, or is it just some sort of bundling of a lot of disparate pieces? How do you guys see this?
Okay, I hope you guys can hear me clearly. It's
Mhm.
raining a bit outside. Am I audible? Okay, Prem, to answer your question, I'm assuming you guys will edit out the pause anyway, so it doesn't matter. Uh, so, Prem, to answer your question, you know, I heard about the Great Nicobar Project about 2 years ago. I went to the island this January. Uh, and thereafter I've generally been sort of tracking it. In any case, the thing which sort of jumps out the most at me is that, just as we have these environment impact assessment studies and so on, it sort of boggles my imagination that we don't seem to have similar economic viability studies for any of the large projects we are mooting. In the case of Great Nicobar, that lacune is really strongly felt because this project is not going to be viable. And this isn't a bleeding heart environmental journalist saying it. I was in Bombay when one of these Niti Aayog reports came out talking about the holistic development of Great Nicobar. And as it happens, I know maritime consultants who have worked on this project. So I had gone over to meet some of them. And the general critique that emerged is that, yes, there's a business case to be made for the transshipment port. At this time, in any international cargo coming into India is being unloaded at either Singapore or Colombo, and vessels which are trying to meet, let's say, feeder demand for Calcutta, Vizag, Chennai, etc. They're traveling either all the way to Singapore or all the way to Colombo. And that if we have a transshipment port at Great Nicobar, sailing time, sailing distances essentially come down by half. There is a economic rationale for the transshipment port in that sense. The catch is a port does not exist on its own. A port needs a city around it.
Hmm.
Okay, no shipping line is going to relocate its shipping business to a new site like Great Nicobar unless there is a functioning airport, unless there is adequate housing for staff, uh, hospitals, schools, power project, everything, right? And this is where the catch comes in, which is that if you were to look at a regular port, every port has a lot of economic activity going on around it, which is what supports the city that comes up around the port. Transshipment, however, is the sort of low value adding business where all you're doing is you're picking up a container from ship one, putting it on the berth, picking it up again and putting it on ship two. There is no economic activity that is being created by the city per se.
Mhm.
Okay. In effect, what that means is that the revenues from the port have to support the city as well. All right.
Right.
So this is what this guy had been telling me. Okay, the maritime consultant, and then it gets more complicated. And we'll come down to the numbers after this bit. The other catch here is that, sorry guys, this is my UPS acting up. We're having a power cut. Just hold on.
No
Yeah,
worries.
hold on. Okay, so what I was saying is that you have a port which has to support the entire city, right? But the port itself is going to be making relatively low income because there is not a huge amount of economic value being generated from this port. One. Two, what compounds this arrangement is that we are talking about building something on Great Nicobar. So, in Jan, when I was trying to go to Great Nicobar for the first time and failed to, which is something we'll come to later, uh, I had spent a week talking to construction companies in Port Blair, um, trying to understand what they think of the project. And one of the things they said is that given the distance of the islands from the mainland, anything you build here is going to cost 2.5 to 3 times what it would cost on the mainland.
Right.
Which means now, in the case of the port, that if you're saying that phase one of the port, 4 million ton TEUs, ton equivalents, is going to cost you 18,000 crores, right? The problem comes in because now while you're spending 18,000 crores, since you want to take away traffic from Singapore and Colombo, you cannot charge more than them, right? And this is what the ACOM report that Pankaj was referring to says as well, that if we want to compete against Singapore and Colombo, we cannot charge more than $30 per
$35, right?
right? Now the catch is, even if you hit your full rated capacity of 4 million tons, but you make only $30 per TEU, then you're going to end up, I think, making these numbers are, I'm forgetting some of the numbers now, but it's like saying that my interest payment is going to be something like 2,800 crores or so. And what my port is going to earn for me is 1,200 crores. So there is an asymmetry there. And this gets compounded further once you sort of add the other arithmetic, saying ki actually, you don't have to pay only for the port, you have to support the city too.
Right.
When that happens, right, then you're saying that your interest outgoings on the project every year will be close to 10,000 crores. And what you're earning, in effect, is about 1,200 crores. And that is because for the port to come up, for the port to be a success, the city has to come up fully. You cannot have a piecemeal approach here saying that, we'll build that thermal power project now and the airport will follow 5 years later. Everything has to come up simultaneously.
Right.
So this is where it starts to become a little loony, because the ACOM report focuses only on the port. There's nobody who's sort of talking about the economic viability of the thermal power project, the airport, the township. But presumably, if you want private sector firms to come in and invest and set up the rest of the surrounding infrastructure, I would tend to think that you'll have to give them viability gap financing as well. Till numbers, rear up enough for them to be a going concern in their own right. In which case, now just to go back to what Pankaj said earlier, the first cost estimate of this project, 10,000 crores, this was around 2020 or 21. Then something happened and we were told that this thing is going to be 71,000 crores. Then something happened and we were told this thing is going to be 82,000 crores. And now something has happened and this thing is now 92,000 crores, which not only does that sort of expand the distance between what the port is likely to earn versus what your interest payments are, it also doesn't factor in the viability gap funding that you might have to put out. In effect, okay, even looking at these bare-bone numbers, right, this is not a project that screams economic viability to me, right? And now there are additional variables. There was a earthquake.
Raj, can I just stop you 1 second, Shekhar? If I could just go back to what you were just talking before we get to the earthquakes, you said that the port was going to do something like 4 million TEU per year. Is that right?
Yeah, that is phase one.
Phase one. But to do 4 million TEU per year, you need to move, I think, something like 450 to 460 containers per hour, if you did the math. That Singapore at this point moves something like 250 to 300 containers an hour. Do you think we would ever be able to do double the efficiency of a Singapore?
I'm going to work on the assumption that we can.
Okay.
Okay, it doesn't matter. Okay, now remember that this 4 million is also supposed to come from capturing a chunk of the transshipment volumes of Burma and Bangladesh. Irrelevant, tangential question here. Which countries' transshipment car movements has India frozen over the last 3 months because we had a foreigner MEA tussle with them? It was Bangladesh. Right. So why would anybody trust you if you're going to be weaponizing foreign trade? But even if I assume that you do hit your rated capacity of 4 million, your best case scenario, the numbers still don't add up. Okay.
Yeah, if I just wanted to add one more thing, that apparently the average Indian port is 125 to 150 at this
Yeah,
point.
yeah.
So 450 is like a far cry from it. Mundra is the best at this point, which moves just about 180. But yeah, as you said, irrelevant because this is kind of, more pie in the sky. Go on.
We don't want to be no people in a yes country.
Fair
So
point.
one of the
Right.
reasons,
So we
yeah,
are going to work on the assumption ki ho sakta hai.
हो सकता है. Fine.
The question is whether you can interest financiers in bankrolling this.
Hmm.
Okay, and that is where I think one set of problems comes in. Now, the second variable that comes in is that there was this 6.5 Richter scale earthquake about 3 weeks ago,
Yeah.
which the Indian press very cutely described as the epicenter lay to the northwest of Indonesia.
Hmm.
Okay, so but if you were to sort of plot the latitude and longitude, this is about 60 kilometers to the west of Great Nicobar.
Correct.
Okay. Some intelligent sub-editor somewhere managed to sneak in the lat and long into that report. All right.
You
So
can
you are
easily
now
get it from USGS also. It's not a huge secret.
still, I'm glad that
Yeah.
had it in there, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So now you're talking about building what is going to be a 92,000 crore project without getting into viability gap funding in an area which might see large earthquakes,
Hmm.
it's
potentially
all it's already seen land subsidence, right, during the tsunami.
Yes. Yeah. So the land subsidence. So I have been, not by design, but I've been going to the Andamans every 10 years.
Hmm.
Okay. My claim to fame is that I'm the first reporter to be on his way back when the tsunami struck.
Hmm.
Okay. I'd gone for a story on sustainable development in the Andamans.
Hmm.
I finished my reporting in December, got onto a ship, came back and found that the tsunami had hit.
Hmm.
So, in effect, when all reporters were trying to get there, only one jackass was on his way back.
Hmm.
Right. That was me. The second time I went was in 2014, and then I had gone to North Andaman. And when you go to places like Diglipur, what you find is that the coral reefs have been beached. They're all high up. And similarly, now when you go to Great Nicobar, you find that the Indira Point lighthouse is now
Underwater.
15 feet
Yeah.
lower than it used to be.
Yeah.
Right. This is not the kind of a place where you would want to set up large infrastructure at the first level. Now, to go back to this question of viability, what the government has been saying is that, um, so this is, Prem, finally, the much awaited answer to your question. The government has been doing a bunch of things to tell us that the city will be viable on its own. Right. So what they said initially was that this is going to be a financial hub, an Indian equivalent of Macau or Hong Kong or whatever, right? But it'll be a financial hub. Thereafter, we were told that this is also going to be a tourism hub. And now, progressively, I'm not seeing so many references to the financial hub. I'm hearing references to an entertainment hub. Okay. But then, if you look at that airport, the airport has a capacity of 2 million passengers a year. I was asking tour operators in Port Blair about, do you think Great Nicobar can get 2 million passengers a year? And they said that total, that would be higher than the total tourist arrivals in Andaman itself.
Right.
Right. And this is not a phenomena specific to Great Nicobar. So if you look at the archipelago as a whole, there is a proposal to build a medical hub on Little Andaman. So world-class medical facilities coming up in one island, and in case therefore you're suffering from whatever, you just sort of fly across and there's this really pretty place where your treatment gets done. It's again a strange sort of a notion because if I was unwell and ailing, the last thing I would do is fly to the middle of the Bay of Bengal. Right. So what you're getting at some point. So, okay. So the thing is here, the thing is twofold here. We can either poke fun at these plans which don't seem to sort of pass the standard smell test, or we sort of try and sort of, accept the incongruity and try to understand why the incongruity exists. So I was asking a friend of mine in the infrastructure sector saying, asking him to explain to me why these projects which don't superficially make sense, why so much energy being put into these.
Mm.
And what he said is that, see, this is the story of every infrastructure project. What you do is you map out a large vision, which is in and of itself extremely ambitious, which paints a very attractive picture. And that is how you generate public support for the project. All of it might not be viable. What you do thereafter is only build the components of the project which are viable or urgent, and you build the rest of it as and when money becomes available, right? Um, it's like promising people development, right? You in the Andamans, people will be saying that we are going to become like Hong Kong, and this is one way in which you sort of take a restive population and then sort of keep them engaged and hoping for more and so on. Now, if you were to take what the infrastructure consultant is saying and you apply it to Great Nicobar, there are only two economic opportunities that I see emanating from this project. The first of these is that there is going to be a construction tendering boom, right? The port might not be viable, but building the port will be viable. So what you will get is a port being made. If it is built the way any flyover in this country is built, we will be in trouble. Um, but there will be a construction tendering boom for sure. Point one. Uh, I think the chances of it being built in a relatively slipshod way are going to be greater than on the mainland because the location is remote.
Mm-hmm.
There are no independent watchdogs. The administration is supremely powerful. As I found when I tried to go to the island the first time, the administration very carefully restricts and blocks access of independent observers to the island. They don't let you sort of have flight tickets. They were trying to make it harder for reporters and others to get. Actually, they were trying to make it harder for any outsider to get ship tickets as well. So, in a low oversight scenario, the chances of money being siphoned off an infrastructure project rises. Scenario one. Opportunity one. The second opportunity is going to be logging. You're talking about cutting anywhere from 1 million to 10 million trees, hardwood, softwood, whatever it is. I was talking to some of these logging guys, trying to again understand if there's a lot of excitement in the logging industry about this project. And curiously enough, not really. What the logging timber guys say is that most firms which are in the pulp and paper industry already have their plantations. They don't need this huge throughput of timber coming their way. Also, what one of those guys said, however, is that this is the single biggest logging tender India will have seen in its life.
Mm.
Now, what you do with this
Mm.
is an open question. I mean, you don't even have to bring it to the mainland. You could just sort of export it to Indonesia or somewhere else. But it's one hell of an opportunity.
Right. One of the reasons why I wanted to start with the economic feasibility question was because anytime there is a question of development and people start talking about ecology, you get a lot of people saying things like, yeah, you people are more worried about some frog somewhere, not about the prosperity of the country and all of that. That which is why I wanted to understand from you guys, does this make economic sense? Then the rest of it follows, right? But clearly, what you're saying is it doesn't. Sorry. Uh, Pankaj, Shekhar alluded to it when he was responding to the previous question, the recent earthquake in that region and all of that. Mota moti, what is the possible ecological fallout of all of this happening, if it happens?
May I add one thing before we get into the
Yeah, sure.
ecological impact of this?
Okay.
Uh, so the Great Nicobar Project is a national security project. It's a defense project. It's a
Right.
Yeah,
port
I
project.
heard that it's under the Official Secrets Act. So it falls under the Ministry of Home Affairs or something like that. Is that right?
Yeah, so that's the thing, right? It's a port, but
Mm.
it's not overseen by the Ministry of Ports. There's a defense component to it, right? but it's not under the Ministry of Defense. It is being overseen by the Home Ministry. The last time I checked, the Home Ministry was not giving out too many large infrastructure tenders. And I think that's a part of the political economy here where uh, we have to ask, why is the tendering for this project being done by the Home Ministry? Okay, curiously enough, the local body overseeing the project is going to be ANIDCO, the Andaman Nicobar Industrial Development Corporation. And before this, the biggest large infrastructure project ANIDCO has supervised will be the guest houses run by the Andaman Nicobar administration. They do that and they do liquor distribution. So obviously, when you're building a large project with the risk of huge cost overruns, which could single-handedly reduce this project into a white elephant or an NPA, you will obviously give it to uh, a firm which has never handled a large complex project. So these contradictions keep coming. Right. And again, I think that the standard money question in journalism, who benefits?
Yeah.
Right. That is what you go back to.
Mm-hmm.
And at this time, if you look at the feasibility report of ACOM, it says somewhere that the project will not be viable if the private party has to stump up the full project cost. So what they want to do is they want the government to sort of put up, say, of that 18,000 crores in phase one, they want they want the government to put up something like 14,000 crores. So the private sector guy puts in only 4,000 crores. At 4,000 crores is going to be viable because it's running the project. However, that guy is also supposed to make a sort of a payment of about 500 crores or something like that every year to the government, which has funded that 14,000 crore outlay, right? So if he puts in, let's say, 500 crores to gives 500 crores to the government, and his O&M cost, again, as defined by the ACOM report, is another 500 crores, then he is left with about 200 crores with which to meet interest payments and so on, and therefore he's back to being unviable all over again. Right. So then the question is again this, that if the numbers are so shaky, even if you want to be known as and even if you take great and full pride in being absolutely ecocidal, it still doesn't pass the money test. This thing is not viable.
Right. Pankaj, viability is something that Shekhar just discussed at great length, and clearly, I think from your writing also, I get the sense that you also don't agree that this makes economic sense. What about the ecological part of this?
Yeah, so I mean, Shekhar's work has been quite important. His article in the recent issue of Frontline perhaps is the first very detailed and critical analysis from an economic point of view, which a lot of us are not capable. We don't understand. So you're absolutely right, Prem. This question of when we raise these other questions of ecology, of human rights, of law, this question one is strategic development, India's development, and the economics comes up. And it's very clear from what Shekhar has written and has been saying again and again that this is not going to be economically viable. And that's really, either we begin with that or we conclude the argument with that. Either way, it's a very important argument and it's a very valuable argument for multiple reasons. And if I might just add a couple of things from what I understand, for instance, like he was saying, recently, maybe a few months ago, there was a notification or a suggestion that Campbell Bay, which is the existing headquarters and there's a port in Great Nicobar, be made an EXIM port. And I think they realized that suddenly that, and it might be to do with the fact that shipping raw material from the mainland, because of the distances, it will be far more convenient to import them from Thailand or from Southeast Asia. But unless you have that mechanism in place, you can't do that. But what also suggests is an idea like this comes up 3 years after a project proposal has been made, which people are not even. So I'm not sure what they are thinking about what they're doing. They're not fully aware of the realities, and it is, one step forward, 2 steps back kind of situation. So as you go along, you're figuring out that, oh, we didn't think about this. And how crazy is it to think of a 91,000 crore rupee project and then realize that you've not thought of multiple sets of things. For instance, part of the proposal, and I'll just make this point before going to the ecological one, is that as part of the proposal, in the next 2 or 3 decades, the idea is to bring 3.5 lakh people into this single island. That is part of the idea of the project. The total population of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands today, after 250 years of settlement, is about 500,000 people. And we are not able to manage their needs well. Water is a fundamental problem. Shipping is a very fundamental problem. Shekhar has written about this. How is it possible that an island administration does not care about a shipping system? And it is in tatters. Now, just imagine bringing 3.5 lakh, 350,000 people to one island. What are they thinking? Where will the resources come from? Where is the land? Where is the water? Where is the food? What happens to waste? So it is completely not been thought about. And like Shekhar has been pointing out, all of this is going to uh, show up also in the economic viability. Shekhar, you want to say something there, and then maybe I can continue.
And then you create this very overcrowded city with a water crisis, and then you say that you want tourism.
There's multiple
Yeah, yeah.
layers of contradiction, and absolutely.
Right. So, Pankaj, when you start talking about the ecological, definitely please pay attention to what is the freshwater situation on an island. I mean, an island is, as it is, usually stressed for such things unless it has a lot of freshwater sources, right? So that, and also Galathea Bay is, see, like for example, how the Cochin ship terminal, for example, is constantly having to be dredged. There are issues like that as well. I mean, what is the ecological viability or even the ecological cost of the thing in terms of everything? So please do go through all of that.
I think Shekhar has again written about the cost of dredging and the implications and what will happen. But yeah, we can come to that. So this 2-3 things to be said as the background. This is a UNESCO biosphere reserve. We are talking of, in a 920 square kilometer island I mentioned, these are forests that have not been explored. There are communities like the Champagne living deep in the forests, and we don't know much about them. We know hardly anything about them. This is an island, and I'm talking to begin with the terrestrial biodiversity, and these are just snapshots. I'm also not the best qualified, but hundreds of species of fauna and flora, many of which are unique, are endemic, are threatened, are rare to begin with. I think it's also a case of the unknown, because there are unexplored forests. The oceans have not been explored, so we don't know what we will actually throw up if some kind of research is done. And now you can imagine a 900 odd square kilometer tropical evergreen forest that with very limited human impact. That human impact is of the indigenous communities, whose footprint is a very light one in any case. This is a remote island. We are in the tropical belt. So it is one can't even imagine what the richness and the biodiversity of this place is. The oceans are hugely unexplored, and even what little that we know, for instance, of the marine life, and it's there in one of the articles in one of the compilations that we've done in the writings by a marine biologist, Mahi Mankeshwar. She says even those that we know are not mentioned in the EIA reports and in the official documents. So one is we know very little, and even what we know is not actually accounted for in the regulatory process. It's not brought to the table to say that this is what is actually available, leave alone what the threats might be. So there is, for instance, high levels of endemism, Arti. We have the Nicobari macaque, there is a Nicobari tree shrew, there are reptilian fauna that is there, there are avifauna that is unique to this island. There is the charismatic Nicobari megapode, which is found, as the name suggests, only in the Nicobar Islands, and a prominent site is the Great Nicobar Island. And as a matter of fact, the southeastern coast of the island where this project is coming up is the relatively low-lying land, coastal forest. This is among the prime habitats of the Nicobari megapode. And the Nicobari megapode was quite badly hit in the earthquake and tsunami of 2004 by a combination of the subsidence of the earthquake, like we discussed, and the tsunami. So it's going to again be hit very badly because of that. Galathea Bay that you mentioned, Arti, is now we know it is one of, or probably the most important nesting site of the giant leatherback in the entire northern Indian Ocean.
Mm-hmm.
From what limited statistics we have, it is the highest numbers of leatherbacks are nesting on this beach in Galathea year on year. There are other beaches around that island, but Galathia is one of the most important one. And this port is coming up right inside that bay. We will block off with breakwaters. Roughly the mouth of the bay today is about 3 kilometers. It will be reduced to an entry of 300 meters. And we have scientists and institutions on record saying this will not impact the nesting of the leatherback. How is it possible? I mean, one is you restrict the entry of the mouth by 90%, then you will have huge construction, ships will go in and out, there will be noise, sound, spills, etc. We are going to end up destroying among
Just ask the turtles to take some, alternate route here. Just map it out for them and tell them go there, right?
So this kind of
Crazy.
signing off on that kind of thing is so that's just one example of what the turtles are we're talking about. There is no doubt about the fact that there's going to be a huge loss of biodiversity. We are talking of cutting down, literally clear felling 130 square kilometers of tropical evergreen forest. And even if 50% of that happens, even if 20% of that happens, you can imagine the direct impact and what might be the spillover effects.
Tell me
So
though, let me if just to add over there, you said that this was a UN biosphere, right?
yeah,
Does that
yeah.
not preclude such activity from happening in around? Is there nothing that is legally, uh, mandated, given that you have this kind of a tag?
So there are interests. So I think a biosphere reserve technically does not have a legal mandate in that sense within the law.
Hmm.
But we have in this landscape, we have multiple protected areas. I mean, coming to law, most of this island is has a very interesting legal status of a tribal reserve.
Hmm.
So there's a very unique, let's put it this way, Andaman and Nicobar Protection of Aboriginal Tribes Regulation of 1956. It's a very interesting piece of quasi legislation, let's put it that way, under which virtually the 100% of Great Nicobar Island, except for a small patch of land, is designated legally as tribal reserve. That's one legal protection. It is reserve forest, which is why you require forest clearance. There are also 2 national parks. There used to be a wildlife sanctuary in Galathia Bay used to be a wildlife sanctuary, and it was very explicitly denotified a few months before the project proposal came into the public
Oh, of
domain.
course, great.
So the project proposal by AECOM comes to the public notice in March of 2021. In January of 2021, in a meeting of the Standing Committee of the National Board for Wildlife, explicit proposal for the denotification is put up, saying so as much that this is for the port to come up and that protected area is denotified. Just before that, in another meeting, we all know that national parks have to have an ESZ, an ecologically sensitive zone. For parts of the national parks, there is a Galathia National Park and there is a Campbell Bay National Park. They explicitly made a 0 kilometer distance ESZ because otherwise the ESZ would eat up into the land required for the project. So the amount of coordination and stuff like that is actually quite explicit out there. There is on record. Yeah, Rajshekhar, I'll just finish this, then you can jump in.
Yeah.
There is on record the Tribal Welfare Department of the Andaman and Nicobar administration assuring the project proponents that if the tribal reserve land is required for the project, they will help facilitate access to that land. So this is worse than a case of the fence eating up the farm, because that agency, and because we are not in conversation, say, with the Shompen, they probably don't even know that a tribal reserve exists. So that agency mandated by law for the protection and for the welfare of the community is itself offering on paper in a signed document saying that we will make this land available. And that is kind of beginning to happen. And of course, there are legal issues there. So, it's the whole kind of, like I said in the beginning, it's all ticked off on paper. The minutes, the meetings have been held, the discussions have happened, the proposals are on paper, they have been discussed and they have been approved. In some cases, not that as well. But, and this point of dredging, what will happen to the coral reef systems, the marine systems? This is CRZ 1A. Anybody knowing law, the port is going to come up on a turtle nesting site. The port is coming up in a bay where there are coral reefs. The port is coming up in an area where there are mangroves and there are saltwater crocodiles. A lot of these are Schedule 1 species by the Indian Wildlife, the the Wildlife Protection Act of India. And these are, so a port, if you go by the environment regulation, cannot be constructed in a CRZ 1A. And there's
Right.
another story that subsequent to all this happening and matter in the NGT, the Chennai-based institution that was asked to look at this said, actually, this is not CRZ 1A, this is CRZ 1B. So they just one day they got up and they said that turtles are nesting. I mean, nothing's happened, but it is not CRZ 1B, so it's okay to construct the port over there. So, and you can imagine what the impacts will be. The beaches where the beach of Galathea Bay is a nesting site for 4 nesting turtles, not just the giant leatherback. The giant leatherback, of course, is in some senses the most charismatic there. So, starting from the unknown to very clear impacts on indigenous species like the Nicobar megapode and others, we are talking of destruction of biodiversity and uniqueness that is absolutely unprecedented for the uniqueness, also for the scale. And 130 square kilometers is phenomenal amount of land. I don't think we've had one single clearance of this area on a project in this country. A consolidated single 130 square kilometer forest clearance has been granted. I don't think this happened anywhere else in this country ever. One single large patch of this kind of land in an area which is one of the most pristine, and absolutely. So one does not know where to start, Aarti, and this is somebody who does not know about the biodiversity. If you talk to biologists and people have been writing about it, it is phenomenal what losses are going to happen. There's no doubt
Yeah,
about it.
I think TRSR, that is Shankar Raman from NCF, has said that the loss of rainforest is complete. It will be complete, irreversible, and irreplaceable. And it goes against the whole, like he says, the first cardinal rule of restoration is protect existing forest first, and it goes against that. And it's really stunning. Prem, sorry, you had, or Rajshekhar, did you
No,
have something to add?
Shekhar
And then,
had,
yeah, Shekhar had
Shekhar
something to
had
add.
some.
Yeah.
I wanted to add a couple of things to what Pankaj was saying.
Hmm.
Okay,
Hmm.
let's start with the leatherback. The centrality of Galathea to the leatherbacks. According to scientists, the number of breeding females in the Indian Ocean population of leatherbacks is about 1,000. Okay,
Okay.
there are about 1,000 breeding females in the Indian Ocean population of the leatherbacks. The number of leatherbacks that nested on Galathea in 23-24 in the season of 23-24 was 614.
Phew.
Okay.
Wow.
Now, one would therefore tend to think that this is perhaps significant. Now, when you ask a bunch of Indian biologists about shouldn't you be opposing Galathea given that these are the numbers, what they will say is no, but turtles are adaptive. They will find other nesting sites. Right. What they're not taking cognizance of, or what they're not telling you, is that the government's plans for Great Nicobar are not limited to Galathea Bay. Phase 1 is, let's say, the port. Phase 2 is a part of the west coast and a huge part of the east coast. And then there is also a phase 3. Phase 3 essentially is going to have the whole island ringed with resorts. Okay, and remember, here, I think the thing to also be said is that everything here this is a very fly by the edge of your seat sort of a project because the goalposts are constantly changing. You are told one day that the port is the heart of this. Then you ask them about viability and they say, actually, this is a national security play. And when you question them on that, saying that, why would you build a fully fledged advanced naval base so far away from the mainland, as opposed to having an advanced site or an advanced base in Great Nicobar? What they will then say is that, what the planners will then say is that this is a remote part of the country and we have to assert ownership over it. And that is by essentially settling people, having infrastructure, and so on. Which makes in a story of already significant stupidity, which makes another spectacularly dunderheaded point. You already have an administrative location center on that island. You have people living there. The local community has been asking for a fishing harbor for the longest time. One would think that that should take care of your requirements. If you needed to beef up your naval infrastructure by sort of building a small port, nobody's objecting to that. But what you're getting here is a strange sort of an outcome where the project has been mooted, but it is still very shape shifting. Pankaj has a report talking about how all of a sudden a cruise terminal was mooted and approved, and how all of a sudden a ship repair facility was mooted and approved. And now we are hearing about golf courses,
Hearing about?
right? Golf courses.
Really?
I mean, what do you do once you get rid of that stupid forest over there? Right. A golf course looks pretty. Uh, what I think is happening, and this is what one of these consultants to Niti Aayog was saying, that the gravy train that this project has sparked is actually a gravy train where different consultants are going and pitching additions to the project to Niti Aayog. And whenever something sort of, gets smiled upon, then the hope is that the responsibility for drafting the DPR, the project detailed project report, will come back to the guy who proposed the idea in the first place. So what you have here is something which is shape shifting, where the core issues of viability have not been looked at, where you actually have people coming out and saying things like, to make this thing viable, we should have casinos. But then you end up with the very interesting coincidence of having a naval base and casinos next to each other. In the same way, to go back, right, I was talking to a former Tehsildar who has worked on Great Nicobar, and he said that, okay, I understand that you want to build a port on Galathea Bay, but why do you want to cut all these millions of trees upstream of the Galathea, which is going to bring silt down
Exactly.
into the very port that you want to build?
Correct.
And so now this is already a port which is hoping for viability on a prayer.
Mm.
The last thing you need right now is to sort of add dredging costs to this.
Mm.
And since you are going to be cutting the forest over phases, right, over 40 years, you'll be dredging constantly. So that's a contradiction, right? And then, so what happened here is that, this is kind of like Char Dham, where to get around the peskiness of the environment impact assessment, you break the project into multiple parts. What you've done here is you've said कि port hai, airport hai, township hai, thermal power project hai. There is no cumulative impact assessment.
Mm.
And the absence of that, and God knows there's no economic viability study either, because that AECOM study studies the viability only of the port, not the whole project as a whole. Right? So now when you do this bits and pieces thing and you put them together, the question of viability remains open at the first level. The second thing which happens because of this is this, well, like I was saying, this completely shape-shifting nature of the project where it gets very hard to sort of pin down the policymakers. There's some other point which I had to make, which I've not forgotten, so hopefully it'll come back to me.
Right. But speaking purely as a layperson who doesn't give a fig for the environment, Pankaj particularly, uh,
Neither do I,
I-
man. I hate the
yeah,
environment.
totally. So I would think that you would give some, credit to the government for mitigation. For instance, they've said that you're going to replicate whatever forest you're losing in the Andamans, you will replicate in Haryana. I also read someplace that the corals that will get affected basically it's just cut it and super glue it somewhere else. So
Okay,
what?
so this is what I forgot to tell you. Okay, Galathea was not simply denotified. Okay, what happened is that one day the secretary in charge of environment for the archipelago essentially told the local staffers that we are shifting this sanctuary from this location to another location on the west coast. And that guy said, "What do you cannot shift the location of a sanctuary. Animals come to location A, they don't go to location B. Are you going to have a cop standing there with a board?" His words. Are you going to have a cop standing there with a board telling the leatherbacks to take a left and go another 20 kilometers higher up? But that is what was done. They actually shifted the location of a sanctuary, which boggles the mind of anybody with a nodding familiarity of how ecology and nature work, right? Point one. Point two, I think I was talking about the shape-shifting nature of this, the lack of sort of, interconnections, the lack of, when you look at a really well-executed project, you find uh, internal feedback loops, you see pieces fitting together. What you don't see any of that here. What you see here is a slightly belated recognition that this project is getting some hate because of its environmental impacts. And therefore, we should probably start talking a little bit about mitigation. And what do they propose for mitigation? They propose coral reintroduction, which is insane. The plan is exactly what you're saying, Prem, that you're going to sort of saw through a coral reef, suspend it underwater using, I'm sure, some arrangement of ropes. Then you're going to tow it, and while it's underwater, to a new location. Now, we don't know what the new location will be because all of the island is going to end up sort of seeing industrial activity and economic activity, human activity, more accurately, in the next 30 years or 40 years. So you're going to move this to some location where hopefully, from where it will hopefully not need to be relocated yet again. But you're going to sort of move this block of coral, put it in a new place. And the question they don't tell us is, what about the accompanying assemblage of marine life? What are you going to do with them? Are you going to be getting bottles and catching two of each?
Noah's Ark.
Right? Dude, we already have one of those in Gujarat, man. We don't need more.
I know. This is
Okay.
just getting more and more bizarre, but yes.
And now, then you say that, okay, we also have the Nicobar megaport, and we have to do something about them. So we are going to create a new sanctuary and we are going to release some of these guys there. The catch is the new island you identify for the megaports is a grand 1.2 square kilometers in size. Presumably, it already has a megaport population of its own, two breeding pairs or something. So how many are you going to bring in here? And how is that island going to support them? So who is thinking about all this?
Okay, so that's the question. Who is the consultant, or who is guiding the bureaucrats through this morass?
Pankaj, do you know?
Shekhar knows.
Shekhar doesn't know, but I'm going to give you a small answer to this, and then Pankaj is going to get into this. Okay, but I'm going to sort of set the stage a bit. When I was in Coimbatore, I had gone to the Salim Ali Center, SACON, right? Along with Wildlife Institute of India, SACON is in charge of these mitigation studies. And what the scientists there will tell you is that large grants are being given for anyone who is willing to study the mitigation dimensions of this project. Right? The funds are large enough to sort of take care of you and your team for the coming 10 years or so. The outlays are large enough. Okay. The catch is, you have set up you essentially invited these chaps to come in and do these studies after inviting expressions of interest for logging. So this scientist I was talking to was saying that, we think a study of this kind will take about 2 years. Our fear is that someday, maybe in a couple of months, we will get a call saying, okay, that's it. Enough time has been spent on your studies. Now just say what you can. Logging is going to start from next month. So to go back again, who is advising them on this? Hard question to answer, because somewhere the decision has been made that the project has to come up. We are not sure what that reason is. Is it national security? Doesn't look like it. Is it the great economic opportunity of having a transshipment port? Doesn't look like it. Right?
Then?
But someone somewhere has decided कि मेरे को मांगता है ये.
But I was going to ask you that question. Why?
Right.
Everything, I mean,
Somebody
it's
wants it,
checking all the boxes of
right?
seismologically risky, ecologically devastating, economically unviable, sociologically degrading, operationally questionable.
But किसी को मांगता है. I think that's a technical sort of answer to this.
Mm.
And once you decide that you want it, then you essentially have a very pliant administration which is not going to question anything, right? Where even the scientific community is going to fall in line and start trying to figure out ways of making this happen, right? There are very, very few conscientious objectors in this arrangement. There are some who say that, I'm not touching this project. But most of them are falling in line, and there's a tragedy to this because if you're a turtle biologist, you owe your life, your career to these turtles, and you're not speaking up for them when you need to be. Now, Pankaj has more to say on how these institutions are working, so we will now defer the field to him.
So I also don't know the answer to the specific question you asked, Aarti, as to how is this happening? What is it? Who's pushing it? Who has an interest in this? Beyond, I think, just reiterating what Rajshekhar said, is that somewhere, somehow, at some point, somebody thought that this has to be done. And who's going to take charge? Who's going to take responsibility? And you see, like a football going around, somebody, there was a bunch of, in the early days, we filed, some friends had filed some RTI or asked questions. So the tribal affairs is saying we don't know, MHA is saying we don't know. They are passing queries, RTI queries from one department to the other. So really, this idea of the shape shifting project that Shekhar mentioned, I think it's kind of, I think best probably defines it. And so we don't know where it originates. There is certainly a lot of push. There must be some coordination somewhere which we don't know of in the public domain. And the problem is that there is a lack of this clarity of what this is for. So again, like he said, this thing about what you mentioned earlier of, it's strategically this project, and that's why a lot of RTIs have been denied, saying that this is a project of national importance and security and sovereignty. But if you look at the components of the project, there is no, a commercial project, a tourism township, these are not projects of sovereignty and national security. There is one
Maybe casinos are.
Maybe casinos are. So one component, which is the airport, which is now supposed to be dual purpose, defense and civilian, is the only component where you might say there is a strategic interest. So there is this, so it's being used strategically. What for? And given the overwhelming evidence, the concerns, the questions of economic viability, of the seismic activity, so who's going to benefit? And this is really kind of baffling. And like Shekhar has pointed out, in some senses, the returns, if they come, are not going to come tomorrow. It is not a easy, low cost mining project somewhere on mainland India where you just dig up the earth, sell it, make your money and move on. This is going to be a long-term investment if anything that's going to be recovered. So I'm not too sure of how this is, what is pushing it and why it's being pushed. But what is absolutely amazing, like I keep saying, is the precision, the coordination, the intensity and the aggression with which it is going ahead. A project of this size and scale has been cleared in 15 months where the environmental clearance process is concerned. So I don't have an answer to the question. I'm just adding to the how one is completely flabbergasted at how it is happening, why it is happening. Where the forest rights is concerned, for 14 years, they did not do any process for the settlement of the rights of the tribal people on this island. From 2007 to 2022. And it was always said, and this has now come up in a very big way, that the forest rights have not been granted. They kept saying that this place does not require forest rights to be settled because the rights are with the tribal people. This is a tribal reserve. And then we have on record, within 14 days, the process was completed and clearance was granted under the Forest Rights Act. And this is with a committee that does not have a representative of the tribal people. It has representatives of local politicians. So completely violative of the law. So,
but just explain that a little bit better, Pankaj. What happened? So in 14 days, basically, what happened in 14 days?
So clearance is required under the Forest Rights Act for forest
Right,
clearance to be
right.
granted for the project to go ahead. So whatever was the necessary process under the Forest Rights Act, the constitution of various committees, the conduct of meetings, of all that was then
Did they happen?
conducted and finished. It happened, but it happened in 14 days. It happened with representations from people who should not be on those committees. It happened with no representative of the indigenous, the two people, the two communities that are the primary stakeholders. And so again, on paper, the process has been cleared. So I'm just kind of adding to the question and the confusion and the completely confounding nature of who's interested and why are they doing it and
So
why are
what
they
about
doing it
it
in so
being
many.
notified as a tribal reserve? I mean, it was a tribal reserve. Did it have to be denotified as one, or what happened?
So that's what I said. The tribal welfare department has offered to help doing that, and
So they've
that
so
process. So
interesting.
that process, I don't think it's happened, but it's in the discussion. So why that has not happened uh, in terms of the paperwork, but you
Hmm.
have so more than the local regulation. The tribal reserve is under a local regulation.
Hmm.
Of course, a act of parliament is a far more will take precedence on how it operates. So that is the primary source of the legitimacy of the rights of the people. But that's the kind of process. So it is multiple times we see this. So uh, it really just feels such a waste of time and energy to argue again and again that this is not going to benefit anybody at all. This is not even a security project. This is this question of national security, this issue of strategic relevance. This is an out and out commercial project. This is a transshipment port. This is a 130 square kilometer township with all the things that we've been discussing. So where is this? You're seeking to bring in tourists. You're seeking to make it a cruise hub. So beyond just repeatedly arguing that this does not make sense, and actually doesn't matter who's pushing it. Of course, we need to understand and we need to make that argument, but it just simply is not viable, is not sensible at so many levels. We can go into so many issues that are there. One is, of course, the due process that I was talking about. This point of what Rajshekhar mentioned about scientific institutions, and there are two or three just quick examples I want to give to you. There is a very interesting interview recently in The Wire that was done, interview of P. Balaram, the former director of IISc, by CP Chandrasekhar. No,
Hmm.
sorry, uh, the seismologist. I forget his name. This is it'll come to me. But Bangalore-based seismologist who's been writing about these things, and he was conducting this interview with Balaram. And in the
Hmm.
interview, in one of his questions, he's actually talking about to Balaram, talking about the uh, scientific institution, what they're doing, and he said that he was asked by Current Science to review the book that we did on the project, this book called The Great Nicobar Betrayal. And so I had sent a copy to Current Science for it to be reviewed, and it was sent to him with the caveat that you will not write anything against the project or the government if you want to review the book. So he said, I will not
But
review the book.
both
So
RT
what
and I
is this?
have the book, and it's entirely about the non-feasibility and the ecological damage and all.
Absolutely.
So how
So
do you review a book?
exactly. So that a scientific institution, a scientific journal puts this condition on a scientist to review a. I mean, what is the logic of something of this kind? There is Dr. Asad Rahmani of uh, the former director of BNHS. He's on record to say that everybody is scared to speak about this, and why should that be the case? I mean, of course, it's a statement on the larger state of affairs, but where uh, where lives are at stake. Imagine you bring in 300,000 people into one of the most seismically active zones on the planet. Like Shekhar mentioned, the lighthouse on Indira Point stands in water because of the earthquake that saw 15 feet subsidence that happened about 100 nautical miles south of where the port is coming up, which is the 2004 earthquake, 9.3 on the Richter scale of the coast of Banda Aceh. That saw subsidence of 15 feet. What is the responsibility and the risk when you bring in another 300,000 people into exactly that landscape? And forget that 20 years ago, we had one of the biggest earthquakes in human memory happened at that site. So, why is it going ahead? And it just at every single level, we figure out that it simply doesn't make sense. Who's pushing it? Why they're doing it? Uh, And for instance, the Wildlife Institute of India, which the director at that point of time in the National Board for Wildlife meeting said it is okay. In January of 2021, there is an RTI response that somebody filed in June of 2021, where Wildlife Institute of India said we have never done any work on turtles in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and they signed off on the most important nesting site of the giant leatherback in the entire northern Indian Ocean. So there are examples and examples and examples, but actually I don't have an answer to that question of yours, Aarti, as to who's pushing this, who's interested, why are they going ahead with this.
See, that's
I think
one
there
of
is
the
this
things.
just one. Yeah,
Yeah.
in a conversation we had in Bangalore when the book was released, there were experts and even other places saying it's a little bit of, seems to be that we can do it and we will do it, and the bigger the better. So the logic of it is not anything beyond this, the optics of showing that we can do something big and we can do something bigger. So that seems to be, to me as an outsider, somebody who does not have that insight of how the government works, to me that seems to be the only rationale, to show that we can make it big. And there are other examples in the recent history of the Andamans where these kinds of projects have kind of been proposed in that sense. So I don't have any other understanding or any other lens to understand why this is happening.
Okay, may I come in here?
Mhm.
From where I stand, the question of why are we doing this is really simple. It's logging and it's construction tendering, because there's no other logic here. Okay, that's the only sort of thing which has any sort of shred of viability attached to it. One. Two, what you're seeing here is actually a process through which you take a pristine landscape and you convert it into a resource frontier. This is what has happened with, say, the forests of Kalimantan, the Congo. It's a global story. What you do is you create the room for speculators. You say that this big project is going to come, land prices go up, right? Land prices are already going up. You now have Facebook ads coming out saying that, we have land for a resort, for a homestay, whatever else. But you're going to flip this island into a resource frontier. The speculators will make money. Some of these loggers and others will make money. And then the project will sort of be forgotten. That's one thing. There are so many, this whole thing of um, the role of the local administration is really worth noting as well, because it sort of talks about the political economy of this country in a way. Uh, Reporters from the News Minute and Scroll went to the island, and very soon they were being followed by the cops and IB officials. Okay. The administration is said to be very, very fearful of negative reportage. Okay, and therefore this attempt to make sure that nobody really reaches the island, uh, which is an interesting sort of a factoid. Now, there are contradictions. After the tsunami, uh, the surviving Nicobaris were all resettled close to Campbell Bay or in Campbell Bay. For 20 years now, they've been saying that they don't want to live off government dole and they want to go back to their villages. For 20 years, the administration has not allowed them to go back, while denying them land for plantations locally and so on. So they've been working as wage labor, which is a form of ethnocide. If you were to look at books like Simranjit Singh's ethnography on the Nicobarese tribals, you will see what a proud, self-reliant, uh, trading community this was. They used to trade with other countries, copra and stuff like that. You take that community and you reduce them to wage labor. One. Two, whenever they say that they want to go back to the island, they say the administration tells them, no, you cannot go back there because there is a risk of a tsunami. Right? This is for your own safety. But you come to this project, and what the government will say is there is no risk of a tsunami, which is a very weird thing to say, because there is no way you can conceivably know whether a tsunami will come or not. Right? And see, now there is a particular strain of illogic here, because even if you deny the existence of
The
the
possibility.
probability of a tsunami in the future, it might still come, which means that your project is going to be unviable. And yet, even that thought that this thing might not be viable is not stopping the government, right? So sometimes, it helps to sort of not think of the state as a large monolith like Leviathan, but to sort of think of it as a person. If you were to run into a person who wanted to do something absolutely suicidal with somebody else's money, how would you categorize that person's particular state of psychosis, right? Because this doesn't make sense. It's like some guy, it's like the Joker in Batman, right? Saying that, I just want to see things burn. There is no rationality to this.
The funny part of the podcast that we've done so far, we get guests on board, and the idea is for us to understand various issues, and through us for those who watch these programs. This is probably the first episode where at this point 1 hour 20 minutes, I think, they're left with more questions and no answers. And I, I, I mean, Pankaj, you brought up the Great Nicobar betrayal, and both you and Shekhar have been writing extensively about this. You also brought up that past the pillow business that is going on with the RTIs. I wanted to ask, progressively, has it become more difficult to report on these things? Because I see a sort of decrease in the volume of pieces that have been coming out, well reported pieces that have been coming out. And Shekhar also brought up the thing of, you have the IB following you around if you go to that place. Is reporting becoming more difficult?
I think, it's a relative thing that you're asking, but I find in this case that there has been a considerable amount of coverage that the media has, certain arms of the media have actually done. For example, Frontline did 2 complete cover packages. They
Right.
led the and I mean, deep gratitude to Frontline and the editor there, Vaishna. So they did 2 cover packages in a period of 2 years. So they've been a little bit, okay, not the complete mainstream, but even if you look at the Hindu, you look at the Indian Express, you look at all the news portals, News Minute, Wire, Scroll, they've raised resources to send correspondents there. So I think there has been a lot of coverage, and sometimes I feel that this project and this concern, might be there are other projects on the mainland far more accessible that could have done with more coverage. So I wouldn't say that there hasn't been coverage. I think there has been a large amount of coverage. Of course, we can do with more because there are so many layers and complexities and the scale of this project. I mean, for instance, I'll just make this one point that I keep thinking about and I keep telling my journalist friends. You mentioned, Prem, 130 square kilometers of land in the Nicobars is being compensated by 260 square kilometers of land in Haryana as forest, right? Now, the question really, of course, there's nothing that gets more absurd. But the question that nobody has really asked is, what is this 260 square kilometers in Haryana? You have 260 square kilometers of land that has been overnight handed over to the forest department as forest land. That's already happened. It's been notified. 260 square kilometers in a place like Haryana, you can imagine how much land that is. Whose land
Right.
was it? Was it already forest? Was it agricultural land? Was it village commons? So what was happening there? What was the livelihood? What was the ownership? We have no idea. Now, that is something that, that Delhi media can very easily do. And there will certainly be issues that have to be raised over there, which are of implications both ways. They question the logic of doing what they're doing in the Nicobars, but what might happen to people who have their livelihoods dependent on the 260 square kilometers of land? And already there was a report in the Times of India, where some 100 acres, 150 acres were then handed over to the mining department for mining in the same land that has
Right.
been classified as
Yeah.
forest.
Yeah.
So the media is also, I think, they're looking for inputs. They have responded. One thing that I do feel would be, from my perspective, interesting and valuable would be more reportage in the non-English media. Now, even there's a lot of information we've put together, and maybe I can share some of that as well
Yes.
to the listeners of this thing. So the material is available, and one maybe even does not need to travel. But this kind of exposure, reaching out to a larger audience, which we've tried to do through the 2 or 3 books that we've done and the translation that we've done. Specifically to answer, maybe I don't know about Rajshekhar because he's much more in the media and than I am. what he feels. But I think we have had some good coverage. I still remember when I first wrote about it in 2021 as a freelancer outsider. The Hindu put the story on the lead story on the front page of the Hindu, one of the first stories on the Great Nicobar Project, and that is quite substantial for the media house to do. The Express has been running stories regularly, so the Telegraph has occasionally been writing about it. So that is certainly, in some senses, it's taken some time for it to happen, but now the kind of sense of the information and the knowledge and that is there. So I don't think there's not been enough reportage. Of course, there can be a lot more because there's a lot more to be uncovered and a lot more to be written about as things kind of unfold. Yeah.
May I come in here?
Yeah.
There are two elements here, right? One, I think it is so important that the media independently make up its own mind on what the project is, as opposed to sort of taking the government's definition at face value and then working around it. Okay, because very, very often uh, you see large contradictions, and these contradictions need not always be slip ups.
Good.
Okay, so what I was saying is, I think the press has to make up, we cannot sort of simply sort of take the government's definition of a project at face value and then uh, basically sort of move down that path, only raising incremental questions around it. Some of this stuff, it needs to be questioned in its entirety. That's, I think, the first point. The second thing, yes, there is a lot of interference from the government in terms of, not being allowed to report and so on. The countervailing point here is that there is so much anger and resentment amongst the people who are seeing the project coming up that you are not going to be at a loss for information.
Okay, I was just going to ask about that, Raj. So I'm glad you brought that up. Please speak to what the people in Galatia and around the areas where all of this is happening, what their reactions have been to all of this. Thank you.
What you're getting is, some of the traders in Campbell Bay will say that, it's very good, the project is coming up, we're going to benefit from this. Typically, these are
Settlers.
not just settlers, but these are people who have uh, a mercantile background or political linkages. That's what I found. Okay, the shopkeepers, etc., in Campbell Bay were very happy about the project. But you go deeper, you go and talk to the villagers. Okay, and what the villagers will say is that some of them will oppose the project, saying that everything is fine the way things are. Uh, Others will say that once the project comes up, we will all have to leave. That is what happened to Havelock. The villagers on Havelock eventually had to leave because the only work they would get would be as daily wages on any of the resorts. Right. And what the settlers will also tell you, the farming settlers, the former armed forces people who were resettled here in the 60s and 70s, that we came here, we built this island, we sort of protected what was the outpost of the country. And now you are telling us to sort of leave this area because you want our land, right? And you're not giving us other land in lieu of the land we're going to lose, right? But what you have, however, is also bodies like the NCST, National Commission for Scheduled Tribes, going to the island, uh, meeting, as I'm told, amongst others, people of the Vanvasi Kalyan Ashram, and making anodyne statements like all the people want is develop, right? So you are trying to manufacture support for the project by getting other sort of agencies into this. But even a local panchayat leader was telling me this, and he hopes to gain from the project. He's doing some of the feasibility studies. He was saying that, maybe out of these 8,000 people living on the island, maybe something like 500 or 600 will benefit. The others will have to leave.
If I might, is that I think if you look at the macro picture, generally, I think in the islands, of course, there are these undercurrents and these cross currents, but there is a support for a project like this. I mean, or this idea of development and the idea of infrastructure and money coming in, and questions when raised, are looked at not very positively in terms of, here we have a chance for development and infrastructure, and but that is also a response in some senses, partly like Shekhar said, to them not having what we might actually take for granted in anywhere else in the country. So how justified or how unjust, how completely justified the local people are, and I'm talking here of settlers, of getting the basics in terms of infrastructure, in terms of whatever the state promises them, and when they don't see that happening, basic good shipping, infrastructure, communication, and they're so far away for so long, that this question is that why are we being denied that kind of development, and then this becomes some kind of way to get it because it is not happening any which way. Now, what we, I think, have to realize in the larger picture is that this is not happening for them anyway. Of course, there might be collateral, there will be benefit, there will be contracts, something will happen. But even in that context, even if they were to benefit, then I think the larger costs that are to be paid at multiple levels. But I do think, in some one would say that yes, local communities do look at this a lot more positively than some of us outside who come from the outside and have these questions, very valid questions. And their demands in some sense are legitimate, but whether they can, I mean, they are legitimate demands, but whether a project like this is oriented towards that and whether it will deliver for them is of course an open question. And for some of us, it's very clear that it is not going to happen.
Right. And I think it goes back to Rajshekhar's earlier point where he says that the project itself needs to be viable in order to support the stuff around it. And if it isn't, then that whole thing premise falls through.
Absolutely.
Prem?
No, I think,
Guys, let's wind down because I think my UPS will go and then I will not be able to upload the rest of the file.
Okay,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
Good point.
So let's.
No, in any case, that's what I was going to say, that we pretty much covered the broad questions, and we've realized that all of us have more questions than answers. So we just continue to keep an eye on this, and we'll hopefully get you guys back every once in a while to sort of keep looking at this and looking into the latest developments, right? Pankaj and Shekhar, always a pleasure talking to you guys, and thank you so much for taking the time, and Shekhar particularly with your whatever that UPS thing is that keeps yeah. But
And I think Pankaj was in some kind of workshop
yeah,
and stuff like that. Thanks, guys, for making the time for doing this. I know you guys have spoken about this before, but we were very keen on getting you on this program to kind of flesh out some of the things that were just mind-boggling to us and continue to be mind-boggling to us, unfortunately.
It's if I might just say, it is completely mind-boggling, and also responding to that earlier question, I think there has been media, but a lot more can be done. A lot more needs to be done. Just good environmental or economic reporting, analysis. There isn't enough. I mean, it's a fascinating project to study and understand in different ways, and much to be done, generally speaking, but also, if language media can pick it up, if the non-English media can write about it, I think that'll be very valuable.
So that was Rajshekhar and Pankaj. And it really, Prem, felt a lot like deja vu. When I was doing research for Margin Lands, there were so many projects, multiple projects all over the country and across multiple administrations, not one government. It was not specific to a government, this or that, whatever, where questions were asked but ignored. And so many times we find ourselves the worse for it because we did not pay attention, we did not pay heed to some of those, alarms, not alarms so much as genuine worries that were raised, issues, ecological, sociological, all of those. And we're recording this at a time when all the hills are crashing around us because of rampant construction. I wouldn't even call it development, right? It's construction, illegal, illegal when it comes to an ecological lens. It shouldn't have been legal. Maybe it was legal from a legal point of view, but not quite sound in its choices, right?
yeah, and that is what prompted this episode in the first place. And I think if there is one takeaway I'd like the listeners to get from this episode, it is that the Great Nicobar Project is not just about concrete and steel. It's actually about what kind of development India chooses, what kind of future we decide to leave behind for the succeeding generations. And asking the kind of questions that Pankaj and Rajshekhar asked is not a rejection of progress. It is, in fact, the only way that progress can mean something. Actually, Arti, I'm curious, and on both our behalves, I think I'd like to ask our listeners, where do you stand on these kind of debates when there is a conflict between what is seen as development versus the ecological costs or the social costs or even the economic costs? Where do you stand? Is it development at all costs, or do you think that there is space for nuance in this question?
And I would also exhort people to hold in their minds what is happening when it is development at all costs. It's not This is not some alarmist, oh, don't do it just for the sake of not doing it. We are seeing around us enough evidence of what happens when you do not pay heed to these questions. And those evidence come home to roost. I mean, it's affecting all of us.
Exactly. See, the thing is, once a forest is gone, or once a reef is broken, once a community is displaced, there really is no way back. So, the real question that Great Nicobar asks of us is very simple. Will we count the cost before it is too late or only after?
And also, the costs are real in the sense that it's come and hit Punjab. It has hit, I mean, it's not something far away. Nicobar can seem far away, but it's the mentality, right? This
Right.
kind of mentality, which is all over India, and I've seen that. This is again, it's not particular to a government. It's not particular to a time in our history. It's all through history that we've been doing this, right? So it's a mentality. It's really a mentality of man over nature, domination, right? And it may be even a hand me down. This was not how our ancient cultures were. It's not something far away. These kinds of ignoring certain things and treating it literally like the blind man and the elephant, right? You're just seeing one part of it and you're figuring something out, which is not the whole story. Um, can really come home to roost in bad ways.
Yeah, and I mean, we've had conversations offline about these kind of things, and I was thinking of something that you said earlier, where you said this is across administrations, right? That this is not politicizing this is a disfavor to the country, it is a disservice to the country. And I was thinking it's not just about it being across administrations, it is also across countries, across continents. We are not the
Everywhere.
only ones. Yeah, we are not the
It's a
only ones.
mentality. It's a
Exactly.
mentality. It's an ethos which goes against the gentle land ethic that maybe the ancient cultures propounded, right? The Western mentality of man over nature, taming a river at all costs or building something at all costs and concrete will win, has been proven to be wrong.
Absolutely.
And if you don't build appropriately, again, this is not against being against development, being against building, being against construction. It's a question of what, where, when, how, and with whom.
The funny part is, I mean, we have these offline conversations, not just you and me, but sometimes me in my circle, I'm sure you in your circle. And the thing is, whenever people say, oh, you're anti development, I keep thinking, look, I'm a beneficiary of development. I mean, I grew up in the 60s and 70s when you know what the state of the country was like. Finding a good road was a big issue. So today, when I'm driving, say, as I frequently have to do between Bangalore and Chennai, and vice versa, and there's this nice, broad, decently maintained highway, I benefit. So it's not like I am opposed to development or you are opposed to development or those people who ask questions are opposed to development. We are all beneficiaries of development. What are we saying? That development should be for good. It should leave behind benefits without extracting too much of a cost. a cost in terms of the ecology, a cost in terms of the land, a cost in terms of livelihoods, all of that, right? I don't know why that's so difficult to get across. And that is why I want our readers to weigh in. And you can do that either in the comments below, or you can do that through our email, which is from the margin lines. But do tell us, where do you stand on this? Where do you draw the line? What do you think are legitimate questions to ask? Or is asking questions legitimate in the first place?
Yes. Is asking questions legitimate? And often, like you were saying, in my circles, I'm told that GDP is above all. Then let this also factor into your calculations, where we are losing annually 6% of our GDP to environmental degradation.
Right.
We are losing 6% of GDP. I don't know whether it overlaps or it's a separate 6% to water scarcity and floods and things like that, right? Water issues, groundwater depletion, another 4% of GDP. Add it all up. If GDP is that important, why don't we pay attention to it before we lose it, than having to then build resilience, build various things to start bandaging the problem, which is much harder. So keep that in mind as well when we take all these things into account. We are for progress, but progress for whom? Progress how? Who is it benefiting? And who's not at the table when these discussions go through and turn into policy, right?
Also, importantly, what is it costing us as a country, as an environment, as a society, as a culture? All of that.
And it's all interrelated. Environment is
Yes.
not separate from culture, country, and all of that.
Yeah.
That is environment. So
Exactly.
as long as we don't other it, I think we will be good. And so, yeah, we'd love to hear from you. And tell us if we are asking the right questions too. What questions would you have asked of someone like Pankaj and Rajshekhar that we didn't ask? Please, because we are happy to bring them back. They're happy to come back and discuss, because I think discussion is the only way to move forward.
Yeah, and it's somewhat urgent because right now this project hasn't broken ground. They haven't started actual work on that. Once the work starts, it's all way too late. So the more we debate, the more we question, the more we look for answers, the better for all of us. And on that note, folks, as usual, there's a subscribe button down below. There's a bell icon next to it for you to be notified of episodes as they drop. Uh, like I pointed out, we have an email for you to get in touch with us, marginlands at gmail.com. Oh, the nice thing about the email, we recently got an email from, well, I don't want to mention his affiliation, but somebody who is part of the policy making process who wants to come on Margin Lands. And I was so kicked. That's validation. People actually thinking that this podcast is worth coming on and voicing their opinions on, right? That's brilliant. So, yeah, if you have ideas for future guests, or if you're potentially a future guest yourself,
Yes.
write to
Please
us.
let us know. Write to
Yeah.
us. Ping us. You know where to find Prem. He's on social media. I'm on Instagram. So you know where to find us. If you don't, it's in the show notes. And show notes are, again, amazingly done by Prem. People get really blown away by it every single time. So please do. You have a lot of reading material there as well. So anyway, without further ado, so long for another 2 weeks. And then we'll see you with another podcast episode.
Thank you for listening, guys, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye bye.